to Fifth Tuesday, a special edition of Planet Poets Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest host today is the wonderful poet and novelist Lee Slonimsky, who has graced Planet Poet with at least 9 appearances. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Sharon. Great to be here.
It's always great to have you as such a wonderful guest. And
thank you.
Over the years, when Planet Poet falls on the 5th Tuesday of the month, hence 5th Tuesday, Lee will invite writers from the Hudson Valley, New York City, and beyond to my 5th Tuesday show. Today, Lee has brought poet Robert Charles Basner to read and discuss his evocative and original poetry. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Sharon. How are you?
I'm so happy you're here today. It's such a pleasure for me to have you and Lee on the show. And I'm going to read Lee's bio. Lee Slonimsky has published 9 full-length volumes of poetry. His third book, Pythagoras in Love, has been translated into French by Elizabeth J. Coleman, Greek by Stamatis Polinakis, and most recently into Polish by Henryk Czerniak.
Thank you, Sharon. That's great.
I'll leave it to you now.
Okay, so it's a great pleasure to have the poet, Robert Charles Basner, who, as you'll hear in a moment, is also an incredibly distinguished doctor, as my guest today. And let me begin with Robert's bio. Robert Charles Basner, heir to the farming and fielding of a place that has slipped shyly, slowly, southwesterly off the main Catskill Mountains, holds the titles of Professor Emeritus of Medicine, Columbia University, and Special Lecturer in Medicine, Columbia University Irving Medical Center. He is an internationally recognized physician and biomedical researcher, author, editor, editorialist, and educator. A former faculty member of the Harvard Medical School and current faculty member of his alma mater, the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. He is a laureate of an NIH Academic Career Award of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and of the Sidney Zolot Music Award of the City College of New York. He has published poetry in numerous journals, including the Columbia Review, Promethean, and Chronogram, and has been an invited reader at the Woodstock Poetry Society, the Lace Mill in Kingston, Perfect Pitch, the Hudson Valley New Year's Day Spoken Word Performance Extravaganza, and the Unterberg Poetry Center in New York City. He is an active member of the Woodstock Poetry Society and the Poetry Annex, and is working on a first collection of verse, Ancient, Autumnal, as well as a sequence of musical settings for voice and viola. And before I say hello to Robert and we get underway, I want to say this is probably as distinguished a bio in the tradition, let's say, and it's a global tradition of physicians who have also been writers.
Yes.
Chekhov maybe certainly one of the most prominent names, and in our own American poetry, William Carlos Williams. I think either one of them would have been hard-pressed to match these medical credentials, and as you'll hear in a moment, the poetry, incredibly enough, is on the same level. So, Robert, I welcome you to the 5th Tuesday show.
Thank you.
Yeah, by way of introduction of your work, before we get our discussion underway, I'm wondering if you could read the first poem in the sequence we have planned to delight our audience with, which is entitled A Viola, Barcelona, 1779.
Yes, and I'm overwhelmed by the privilege of being on the program, Lee and Sharon.
Oh, we're very happy. It's our honor to have you here.
Absolutely.
It's terrific. Thank you.
So this is A Viola, Barcelona, 1779. Sound centuries decided dark in lathe and graven ground, when rare rights of maker were almost bound to rights of rarer ear bowed to it. when with the air alto altered, finely as final, rich with rough waver, was bid the music at the ache of things.
Just beautiful. Let me begin. I'm very curious. This poem features extraordinary sound, intense alliteration, really, and just a wonderful ear. The rare ear that's mentioned in the poem would have to be in the possession of a poet to write something like this. And you mentioned in your bio having won the Zolot Musical Award. Could you speak for a moment about the connection you find in your own psyche between music and poetry?
I'm not sure I ever thought about that. This is, I think, probably the only piece I've written having to do particularly with music. Of course, music and poetry are intimately related in so many ways. This particular one is related to an auction, and this was my daughter's viola that was at auction. So it specifically spoke to me in ways not even having to do with music, but I think that music, rhythm, meter, rhyme is very much related to music, where we also have the same thing. We have sequence and meter and dissonance, very much as in what I make out to be poetry.
Interesting. So I'm just going to follow up on that fascinating response by asking if there was any particular composer or musician, and in addition to that, any particular poet who, has been an influence and or an inspiration into your poetry generally. It's true that this is perhaps a singular poem that's about a musical instrument, but the musical quality I was referring to, I have found really present in everything you write. So just for a moment, if you could say anything about individual influence.
Well, as far as music, I think, and musicians, Beethoven, of course, stands out in every phase of his musical career. You mentioned the title Ancient Autumnal, and autumnal is a word that's been applied to Brahms's late music, particularly the clarinet quintet and the Fourth Symphony, and I think those also are very evocative and image very well how music applies to all the arts, really. Yeah, so I think that there are obviously lots of composers that actually you can name almost any of the great composers, and I think I would that resonates with me in many ways. And of course, a more recent hero is Leonard Bernstein, and he championed tonal music, and I championed writing tonal music and writing tonal poetry.
Sharon, since you're such an accomplished musician, well, great, absolutely great soprano, and
thank you.
And of course, your husband is a distinguished composer, Robert Cucinotta. Would you have any follow-up on this point?
Well, I'm so fascinated by your use of meter, Robert. There's such a wealth of meter change, and I was struck by reading your poems, how where Lee writes in iambic pentameter with the sonnet, you write as one of your poems is written totally in spondy, with the first syllable accented in many of the poems, with various types of meter change. And I found in that a strange atonality, actually. And I was thinking perhaps of Charles Ruggles. Do you know his work?
Somewhat.
Yeah, I can understand Bernstein. I can also relate to more of the miniaturists also. But I found the use of meter, like a wicket of meter, a forest of meter, that I really find incredibly musical.
Yes, that's a great point.
Okay, so I've spoken already of the really amazing duality of, or actually more than two, but we already see in terms of, well, the duality, of course, is Robert's career as a physician and his brilliance as a poet, but then he has accomplishments in other arts as well. So I don't know what the total number actually would be to try to summarize it. But the next poem, which I'm going to ask Robert to read, begins somewhat portentously with the phrase, the ill, and that maybe also will conjure a couple of questions about the really unique combination of the medicinal and the poetic. So without further ado, Robert, if you could read Daylilies.
Okay, so this is Daylilies. The ill, too, are accomplishing summer's day, nothing of other day or other summer, shrubbing bloom and afterbloom, common color, against every peeling porch white, each clapboard's clutched at white of belonging. So summer's suffuse closes over once richly rural roots, rutted in arrival, the ill, too, root, return to.
I love the return.
Wonderful.
I love the return to the first line.
In writing this poem, were you conscious of in beginning with kind of a reference to illness? Are you conscious of a physician's perspective, or is this just attributable to the tremendous grasp of sound and image?
I would say that this is where the physician and the writer came together in totally unexplained way. It was totally spontaneous. I didn't mean to write about illness or the dying or death, although my career has been involved with that, and it was uncanny how it actually came together in the observation of the common daylily, which really lives for a day in the summer, although others shrub up with it. But this one was certainly subconsciously, I think, or unconsciously, about many hours in the ICU in the intensive care unit with the ill, who also are poets and musicians and the living, and also want to return to as summer unwinds. And to belong and to clutch at everything belonging. Yes, this was just came about without my summoning it at all. In fact, I'm very leery about actually trying to write as a physician. Later on, I'll read one other work that mentions Asclepius in a sort of different context, but really that's about as far as I've gone in my writing, in my poetic writing, having the experience of being a physician.
Well, that's a very clarifying and kind of extremely revealing answer. We'll need to move on. Before we do, I just want to pay tribute to two moments of sound in this poem: shrubbing bloom and afterbloom, and closes over once richly rural routes rutted in arrival. Unfortunately, we're going to have some time limits given the depth of Robert's work. So next, I'd like him to read in an Athens bookshop window, which is in memoriam to Constantinos Vardis, who Robert, I think, can explain that connection. And also there's a prescript from the Bible, and I'll leave that to Robert to read.
This is in an Athens bookshop window and in memoriam to Konstantinos Vardis, who was my beloved teacher and mentor at City College, which we both attended at the same time, and he died early, and I was not writing this about him originally. I was actually writing this about your experience with your Pythagoras in Love being translated into Greece, and during the contagion, and so envisioned this scene of the book arriving and being in that bookshop window where no one was going because of the pandemic, and of course immediately thought of Professor Lardis, and so I'm very moved to actually have written this, and the epigraph from John 1:14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and I really have that in, not because I was thinking about it when I wrote this, but because I also talk about words and flesh, and so wanted to give credit where credit was due. So here's the small piece. Now enough pain is sun to see pity in it, see cold cobbled, cobwebbed light cover, plain tabled plaint of pages past poet's existence, Asclepius' scalpel still poised on each word's flesh, each soul sought, but none near need enough, or loss, or how last things have come to be known.
Wonderful. Could you explain, since some out there may not be familiar, the kind of medical context of the name Asclepius?
Well, Asclepius is in different languages, but certainly in Greece, in Greek, the way I have spelt it here, really the god of medicine and the person we take our oath to when we become physicians in the Hippocratic Oath. So he was the real god of medicine, and was also involved with being such a great physician that he was getting into saving people who were already dead, and that's probably how he met his demise. And so this is obviously a poem about mortality and how long we survive. And so the feeling that Asclepius' scalpel is really judging whether what's going on there will survive. It's a life and death situation, really. And so that's where Asclepius and his scalpel, still poised on each word's flesh, still judging pages past the poet's existence, comes in. And of course, speaking of meter, I did. This is one of the only times I really tried to write in a specific meter, which was the heroic Greek dactylic hexameter, and it actually came out that way, but rather than being 50 pages long, was 5 lines long. But I guess that's okay.
If I may interject, the scalpel to me is reflected in cold, cobbled, cobwebbed, cover. It's sort of the cutting words there.
Yes.
And then they're mitigated later on.
That's a great observation, Sharon. I'd like to add an autobiographical note, but my book did come out, and it was initially published in Greece in May of last year. Sort of, it turns out now, early in the pandemic, but at the time, it was hoped maybe mid-pandemic. In any event, since people could not go into stores. The publisher was kind enough to make a little movie of the book in a bookshop window, which I think is a setting that comes through. But this poem, again, is just tremendous sound and depth. And, I could go on, actually. I know we have a break coming up, so I will try to get one more poem in before then and, see as far as we can get with the rest of them. The next poem, Robert, if you could read it, spoken in October, to be heard in January.
Okay, that's the title, and it's an interesting story behind it, but I'll read it now. Spoken in October, to be heard in January. If I let myself into my landscapes, they would be no longer landscape. Place must progress, soulless, weather on weather. Worthlessness to learn vista with lives. Ochre what is already oak. Put fence post figures in forgotten fields already under flurries, drift white forming to assure ancients autumnal. What is ancient to absence between leaf? Autumnal, the light each day furthers from.
That's lovely.
I just want to interject that the wonderful phrase, ancients, that's not ancient, that's ancients, A-N-C-I-E-N-C-E, a word that is somewhat underused nowadays, but very much still in the lexicon. So a very similar phrase to the really awesome title of your book, which is being composed right now, Ancient Autumnal, and I am curious about the use of ancients there. It's brilliantly used, and is really kind of creates a memorable phrase. Curious, since you use ancient in the next line, what is ancient to absence between leaf? If you could say a word about what went into that artistic decision.
Well, again, ancients came to me. I didn't think there was any other word for it, and ancient really didn't fit there. Ancients has just so much movement and evokes so much more. Ancient sort of stops and is not as evocative, but I didn't want to push that word ancients any further. I sort of switched the feeling from that state to being ancient in the better known phrase. The ancients or ancient is really here to denote as close as we get to what we think is immortality in our lives, in our writing, in what we leave when we pass on. And autumnal, really the opposite, more of the art. Again, thinking about Brahms' autumnal music, for example, but something that is not going to live on. And so, of course, in the landscape where we don't really belong, and this has something to do with, of course, the Genesis and the Garden of Eden. It just comes out that really it's not people, but the landscape. What is that is has the best chance of immortality, and really speaks of autumnal without us. So our work really is worthless in that sense. The title actually was taken from this recent New Year's Day extravaganza, which I was privileged to be a part of. And we literally, because of the pandemic, had to go into the studio in October and read for 10 minutes to be broadcast on January 1st. And so coming up with something read or written in October to be heard in January, or the opposite, is a very interesting and poetic idea. And so that title comes from that, and the poem wrapped itself around that title, really.
I heard you read. I tuned in on January 1st. It was lovely.
Oh, thank you. Sure.
Also, the word ancients, which is a noun, it implies a realm, an expansive realm that still exists. So I don't know if I'm off the mark there, but it seems to echo what you're saying.
Oh, that's entirely right.
Thank you. You're listening to Fifth Tuesday, a special edition of Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and joining me is my guest co-host, poet and novelist Lee Slonimsky, and our special guest, poet, physician, and musician, Robert Charles Basner. Lee, if you would continue.
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. We're going to go forward. I don't want to rush through any of these poems. We will probably have to skip around a little bit in terms of possible orders, but and to continue with the seasonal theme, I'd like to move on to View of the Sobanka Countryside, April 1942, which somewhat, I'd say, moves on from the autumn in a really unforgettable way. And Robert, if you could read that, please.
Sure, thanks. And this is, for me, really my, so far, one and only attempt to wrestle with my heritage of the Holocaust. And these were actually gift notes sent by the Holocaust Museum. This is a watercolor of George Byfield. And I titled it View of the Sobanka Countryside, April 1942. How hills unfolding a full month of spring claimed accurate colors and contagion was not clumsy, not survival. Starved study wrathed landscape with its makeshift morning, languaged in the once living, left in purple wind marsh, poor paper white, unwanted as any art.
Could you read that one more time?
Sure. Although my voice may break a little bit as I do. How hills unfolding a full month of spring claimed accurate colors and contagion was not clumsy, not survival. Starved study wrathed landscape with its makeshift morning, languaged in the once living left in purple wind marsh. Poor paper white, unwanted as any art.
Very powerful. Once again, we see, for example, contagion, another medical legacy word, but a very different context than the study or practice of medicine, and then beautiful images that conclude the poem. I would like to ask, as a reader, what you meant by the line "unwanted as any art."
I guess the idea that this painter could still be painting during these terrible times, but even he, I imagine, trying to paint accurately in a time of the Holocaust is changed by that, and really the landscape is wrathed in that sense, and everything seems to be unwanted. Certainly the perpetrators of the Holocaust probably weren't too welcoming of the art. I think the artist himself would have to question and wonder whether such art could ever be wanted. And of course, as artists, if we're writing or painting or playing music, when we know it's unwanted by anyone else, it's difficult for it to be wanted by ourselves. So that was basically the gist of it.
Thanks. That's really sheds light on it. Now, if we could move on, this is a poem that I've known for a while, which really also has all kinds of resonance on issues of art and immortality, and that's Sempervirens.
Okay, and now we're out of this northeastern landscape and the farms and fielding that I'm heir to, and we're in California, and Sempervirens is of course the mainstay of the Northern California landscape. So, Sempervirens. That Tang poet is 14 centuries dead, who pitied for existence higher, hidden by dropping blossom, more homaged and aged than twists and sags of Huashan songed pine, but composed only earthen verse and passed unsolaced, as all poets become their poems, who never saw Sempervirens begin slow soar in sea-kept coast cold to height that would forget fern, flower, forest, its own gnarl, to age, to evergreen, fog-foliaged, spindled in a spent light, the lace of lonely things.
This is a gorgeous poem. I really like this one, as I like the others, but this one seems very much, the structure seems very much like the subject of a slow-growing plant, a slow-growing evergreen. And I think the spondees, the stress on the beginning of the beginning syllables gives it that intensity and that slow-moving quality in a poem of very few words.
Great insight, yeah, Sharon. That's really great. I want to add that there are some memorable moments in the poem. One coming in line 6, as all poets become their poems, just fabulous. And then in the last line, the lace of lonely things. The setting is so totally evocative. Between the poet and the Sempervirens, their slow soar in the sea-kept coast. It's a combination of, I'd say, the sensibility of poetry, the best of poetry that does have some sense of immortal or eternal truth in it, and some promise of lasting for that reason, and the metaphor of this memorable tree. It's just, they're woven together really, I'd say, brilliantly in this poem. I just want to pause for a moment. The next poem is actually, as we've seen already, there is, in addition to the influence of music, an influence of painting, visual imagery, and also, in some cases, specific painters. So I will have a follow-up question similar to my one on the music, but before getting to it, I will ask you to read After Weatherside.
Okay, and this is after the painting entitled Weatherside, a tempera of Andrew Wyeth, who I follow very closely, both for his painting and his poetic, his nature as a poet. So this is after Weatherside. Time gave up quickly here, as brushwork was finally given. In mid-sun, roof pitched for pine airs, sodden dissolves, angled into ashen, each window a weather, ceasing in sea-cedared sides, as could collapse in the least lean of color. A clothesline left across its comfort, white without other distance.
Just amazing. I really draw in my breath that could collapse in the least lean of color. But there are so many moments with sound in what is only a 7-line poem. You have mentioned Wyeth's importance briefly. If you could expand on that, and if there are any other paintings that have also, painters or paintings, that you've also found sort of catalytic in their intersection with your writing.
Wyeth, Vincent, I won't try to pronounce his last name, nor do I have to, and Cézanne, and the dry points and etchings of Rembrandt, I think, are catalytic in that sense. But Wyeth, in his amazingly poetic nature, and if you read his talking about his own work, you realize had he chosen to do so, would have been a first-class poet. Actually, was a first-class poet, and his art is I find just unspeakably beautiful and meaningful, and but even his evocation of this house in Cushing, Maine, which he called Weatherside, was the people there lived and died. He lived and died, and this is what we're left with.
Very interesting. And in continuing on along this thread, I do see we have coming up another opportunity for the audience to hear the amazing ability in your poetry of painting these concise verbal pictures with musical sounds, so kind of merging these three broad areas of artistic expression, poetry, music, and art. And we'll find this in the next poem that I'm going to ask you to read, and which also echoes Sharon's comment a little while back. Since on the page I have, you have a parenthetical note written in Spondee, and that's the poem on Ellsworth Kelly's Plant Drawings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I should have mentioned Ellsworth Kelly also, but was privileged to know him, and interestingly, this exhibition we were invited to in the Metropolitan Museum of Art of his plant drawings, and these are not paintings but drawings, and they're extraordinary, but the situation was particularly meaningful to me because my wife Marianne had just undergone open heart surgery for a valve, and this was our first time out of the house after recovery from that surgery, and so it was a very auspicious occasion.
Robert, could you explain what a spondee is?
So in terms of metric
Yes.
feet, and you were talking about I am, and I think that I tend to gravitate to I am, and mostly iambic pentameter, which is da-da. Spandi is two separate stresses, so da-da. And I did not intend to write in Spandi, but once I realized I kept it going. And so it's actually extraordinary how this came out in Spandi. I didn't really mean to at all. It came from somewhere, and so I'll read it and show how it's all Spandi. So and it's hard to get it to end, begin and end on Spandi. It's again a very rhythmic purview of things. So here is on Ellsworth Kelly's plant drawings. Leaf line vies with bare space. Verse touch, flown, then flourished. Leaf on leaf, graphite greens, but framed so, aches of acres, of fall of foliage, that bare place, which too is bloom.
There's a visual intensity to this poem, which, in addition to the sound, and the Spandi, I think, is a somewhat intense metrical foot.
Right.
Just you can really see what a drawing might have been, but also in the poet's revisioning. Beyond that, I have a curiosity. I notice the word aches comes up quite often, or it's maybe not so much mathematically frequent, but it can come in very important transitional moments in your work. Aches of acres, of course, wonderful sound, but of course ache, tempts one to think of the physician's role as relieving aches and pains, and if there's a subliminal or even conscious connection there. I mean, aches of acres, it's just, and then followed by a fall of foliage, and then the brilliant use of bloom in the ending. I mean, this is all, it's very subtle, but it's just tremendous craftsmanship. So on the aches point, not totally a question, or really a question at all, but if there's anything you would say further on that in terms of, any awareness of that word or where it might come from.
It's a great point. I hadn't thought of that as having anything to do with medicine, and how could it not be there somehow? But again, I didn't think of the word aches as being definitive to my to my thinking about writing. But I think of all the words I could pick out, that would be it. And it's again just natural. So the music at the ache of things is probably my most favorite. My favorite use of the word. It comes up in a couple of other things, which I probably won't read today. But ache is a word I think has not been really used all that much, and just means so much, or at least means to me. Sometimes that's all there is. And of course, aches, particularly in the viola poem, goes along with things. And I think that I've become the only person, certainly the only person I know, who's ended two pieces with the word things. Many people have used the word things, and I didn't shy away from using it because to me it's very meaningful. But only one person I know of, the greatest of the great Seamus Heaney, or Seamus Heaney, is probably better pronunciation. use the word things at the end of a poem, and so which I really wasn't thinking of when I used things at the end twice. But so aches and things is very meaningful, and but has to be subliminal in terms of being a physician.
If I may say, I find this is a poem of about 20 words, and I find the fall of man, the fall of Eden, of fall of foliage, the aches, the bloom, which implies what happens after the bloom. There's so much in here, and the poem does ache with what will happen or what has happened. It's very circular too, so I appreciate that.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Unfortunately, we're running low on time now. I just have a very quick follow-up on your point on things and Seamus Heaney, and just to add to that one of the most, if not the best-known poems not only by William Butler Yeats, but probably in the last century of English language poetry, The Second Coming, has the memorable line, "Things fall apart, center cannot hold." I don't know if that influenced, of course, another profound Irish poet and his aspect or his approach to that word. But anyway, there's part of the tradition.
Yeah, no, he's an idol, and things fall apart. Things fall apart, or all things contempt me from this craft of verse. Really, it's more of a problem than a help. I have to ask myself, am I allowed to use the word things after Yeats used it?
Mm-hmm.
After Hopkins used it, there lives the dearest freshness, deep down things, and I have to understand that if it really comes from within, I can use it, and rather than being afraid of it, celebrate that I could even think of a word that such great poetic minds and lives also thought
mm-hmm.
of.
Sharon, do we have time for one more?
Yes, we do. We have about 2 minutes.
Okay. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit in the original plan to, and in sort of enchanted and intrigued by the dedication of this poem. It's not someone I'm familiar with, but there is an MD after the name, and that's the poem Main Street.
And I'm so glad that I can finish with this. I really wanted to. Just very quickly, this is, again, another ekphrastic, as it were, poem about a painting by Simon Parks called Main Street Wainscot. And so I've titled it Main Street, and it's in memoriam to Thomas P. Boyle, M.D., medical school and beyond best friend, comrade, colleague, who suffered and died by way of a cerebellar hemorrhage. And his family told me that he kept a copy of this poem in his desk drawer, which I had sent to him many, many years ago. So this is a very early work, although I've revised it. And so in his honor, Main Street. On sun-green, greener patches of pine shade sway and ash. If left uncrossed in summer's reach, uncrossed at summer's last, where light is learned in leaf, and each learned light will pass.
Wonderful phrase, where light is learned in leaf. Just, pardon the echo, but just a luminescent phrase, and just a very deep and moving poem. It's understandable why Dr. Boyle would have kept this poem in the drawer. I mean, I'm glad it's come out of the drawer and found the light of a fairly sunny afternoon. Actually,
it's a beautiful day, and that was so beautifully read, as you so beautifully read all your poems, Robert.
Thank you, Sharon.
Very appreciated. And thank you so much, Lee and Robert, Lee Slonimsky and poet, we're both poets, Robert Charles Basner, for a fine, beautiful hour. It went much too fast. For your wonderful interviewing skills, Lee, and
thank you.
And I'm so happy to be your friend, and I can feel the friendship between Robert and you, which is such a pleasure to hear on the air. So thank you both so much. And
thank you, Sharon and Lee.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And
Yeah. Well, thank you, Robert. If I can just quickly interject, I just want to repeat the very evocative title, Ancient Autumnal. It's the manuscript that Robert is working on, and with any good fortune, could well be available sometime soon.
we look forward to it. Best of luck with the manuscript.
Thank you.